Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. It's Friday, good end times Friday, where we get to continue. We've had a great. Yesterday, we got to have Rich and Janet Cucciaro enjoy their life of what it meant to abide and walk with God and see God's will, and that's always exciting for us too.
Yes, they are such a joy. Yeah. And I'm so glad everyone got to meet them and hear from them.
Such a privilege. And as we've continued with the discussion of the end, that Revelation tells us, chapters 1 verses in the first 3 to 4 verses, is it's really critical that we hear it, that we understand it, and then we be obedient to what he says in it. He doesn't, God doesn't dismiss it. And think about the fact that, in 90 AD is when John wrote this. He was on the island of Patmos, exiled, and God took him basically to this moment, whenever it exactly will be, and says, "Now write what you see." And that's what he did. And again, as we try to put that in perspective, he's seeing things that we already know is 2,000 years ahead of when he was.
Right. Simply because it hasn't occurred yet.
It hasn't occurred yet, and we're here 2,000 years later. So the things that we know, let's say like an airplane. Well, he would observe that. And he would look at, let's say these machinery in flight. He wouldn't know how to describe that.
Right.
And it wasn't, oh yeah, that's an airplane. He would have no perspective on that. So he would have to. I see it. I see computers, I see technology, I see missiles, I see things going on. I don't have any context for that. So the only thing I can do is describe it in ways that I can speak or say. And by the way, in Revelation, what he writes, because again, I believe he's seeing airplanes, he's saying everybody's traveling all over the world back and forth. Going what he called to and fro, and he didn't say it's he didn't get into the ultimate detail of in a tube, and all that, but he said this is all I can tell you is that, because he's trying to explain it, and so that's why Revelation, I believe part of it is throughout the generations that. God said, well, a little bit more than before, and you will attempt to interpret these truths in light of what you know. So that's why we could say, well, we can see now why maybe we're being the end times. And by the way, every generation has thought that.
Right.
And at the same time dismissed it. As maybe not, and so what? Well, God's
and yet where every generation is moving closer.
It's moving closer, and it's going to happen. It's one of those. It's one of those things like when they predicted Christ's birth. Interesting enough, we talked about. Now they wouldn't have fully understood it in Daniel's time, or he was writing, let's say, in the 400 BC, and the Spirit gave him the exact timing.
Right.
It's going to happen this time,
which is fascinating when you think about it.
But they didn't fully understand, well, what is going to happen. And they had the concept of Messiah, thought the Messiah was going to come. There was because of Daniel, there was more of a receptivity to what was going on, which, and this is interesting. We talked about, actually, as part of Daniel's Beast, the Romans. And one of the Roman emperors was Herod during the birth of Christ. And so if we remember the story, the wise men, or the people from Arabia, had traveled because they had seen a star.
Right.
And they were followers of, the heavens, and there were Jews that had told them about the Messiah. And so they said, we're going to go find out. And they followed the star, and it goes, of course, over to Bethlehem. And they go to Jerusalem first. And they said, what do you guys know about this king that's going to be born? And, of course, the Messiah king. And Herod says, what king?
Wait a second.
Well, we've seen a star, and it's portending the birth of a king. And we're here to find out about that and to worship that king. And so Herod, and this is written, he says, okay, thanks. He goes to the Jews, and he says, what's this about a king? And the Jews say, there's going to be a Messiah born in Israel.
Right.
And by the way, Daniel said it's about this time. Because remember, they're looking. He didn't talk about the birth. Daniel talked about his death,
right?
Which was 33 A.D. The end, the time of the Messiah, and that was his ministry on earth. But they said, yeah, it's sometime around now. So Herod said, if that's so, then he tells the wise men, go find him. When you find him, come and tell me. So he says, so I can go and worship him,
right.
what he was going to do is kill him.
Right.
Which we find out. And the wise men get warned in a dream, don't go back to Herod, you just go home.
Right.
And so they did. They just went home. Okay, Herod, those guys didn't come back. They didn't tell me where he was. But evidently they found him, and he's alive. And he's born. So Herod, what does he do? You know what? I'm just going to kill every child that's under 2 years old in the whole area, which he did. So that, you look at that, and interesting enough, as we've been talking about the curse of the world, how cursed is that Herod would kill little babies. And he actually physically did, and this is historical.
Right.
And if you go back and say, wait a second, and this is where the people have problems with Christian fatalism and, how come? Why wouldn't God stop that? Why didn't he stop Herod from doing that? Because it killed innocent babies.
Right.
It's true.
And that's a valid question.
It's a valid question, and it's part of the wicked world that God says, I don't overrule, I don't interfere with. Why did Hitler kill 6 million Jews and try to conquer the world with force? How come God didn't stop him?
Right.
And God said, well, that's part. See, he said, that's what I'm trying to help you understand. The world is under the control of evil, and evil things, which can be extreme. And that's we put a gradation on it. Well, if Herod had only killed a couple kids,
Right.
Okay, but he killed every kid in the whole area. And how wicked is that? And God said, yeah, that's part of the wicked world. So that as Daniel projected that out, it happened. It did happen. Christ was born. Christ did die. Christ did usher in the church. Well, that was predicted.
Right.
Well,
don't you find it interesting, though, just that the Jews actually knew that enough to answer Herod?
Yep.
And yet they still missed it.
Well, that in the scripture, when I read that, it says, yes, the Messiah is coming, and yes, this is the time. And the wise men said, I'm following the star. And here's what shocked me. They knew all that.
Right.
Okay. Not a single one of them went and said with the wise men, hey, I'm going to go with you. I would like to find, if this is so, I would like to worship the king and usher in the era of the king, because we know about this.
Right.
And that's what struck me is.
Well, you have to wonder, did they truly believe that the Messiah was going to be what he said he was going to be? Or were they just too distracted by their own desires and their own world to step, you wonder what all went on there that they didn't step into that.
Well,
because it wasn't lack of head knowledge.
It was two things. One was they had a system. And their system, remember, these are Pharisees, these are Sadducees, the Essenes. They're operating under what they have developed as what they want the Jewish religion to look like. And it was full of rules and laws. And they had taken things to an extreme, so that if you remember, Jesus is accused of how come your disciples are operating on Sundays? It would have been Saturday for them, on the Sabbath.
Right.
Hey, you're healing on the Sabbath. This is against our rules.
Yeah. Don't you know the rules?
Don't you know the rules? And Jesus, his response is classic. He says, okay, what if one of you has a sheep and it falls in a hole? What do? Well, you get it out. You go get it out of the hole. Okay, he said, now you did that naturally, right? Yes. It made sense to you, right? Well, then if somebody's sick, don't you want them to be healed? What difference does it make that it's on the Sabbath? Your rules, you've put rules in that aren't valid. And I'm doing what is going to be the most beautiful, logical thing to do, which is they got a problem, I'm going to heal them. It doesn't matter to me that it's Sunday, a Saturday, a Sabbath, and you've laid rules on that aren't of God.
Right.
And that's what they were doing. So they had all these rules, and they were in power. So they basically were, well, if the Messiah, in their viewpoint, was somebody that was going to rule and take over the earth with ruling, and it was going to be a man.
Right.
Where they're being told by the wise men it's a baby just being born. And they're thinking, well, then, and that's what they told Herod is, yeah, this is the time. Yeah, a king is coming, and yeah, this could be the time. But they would add to that and say, but I doubt that they're saying it's a baby. I doubt that.
Okay.
That probably not that. It's not that. It is the time. Yes, there's a king, but I doubt that, and we don't want to even investigate it, which is what surprises me, is that they didn't even investigate it.
Right.
They didn't go pursue and find out the shepherds, had the angels occur to them, and these supernatural things were happening that they would have said, that is interesting. Maybe I should pay attention.
And interestingly enough, Herod is the one who did believe enough to go do something about it. I mean, not what we would have done, but he believed enough to say, hey, this really is him. I got to take care of this.
Yeah. And his belief was out of, well, you know what? If this is true, then I'm in trouble. Because again, their definition of king is he's going to be ruling, not me.
Right.
So, the ruler, and this is where the principalities and powers comes in, is, why do national bad things happen? Well, you got leaders who want the power, and their use of power is to come against you with physical force, killing, war, oppression, rules, etc. We're having one right in front of us. That's Cuba. And by the way, there's a lot of Cubans that still live in Florida, and
a significant population. Yeah.
And see, they remember how magnificent Cuba was. It was prosperous. By the way, lots of Christianity was there. And it was prosperous, one of the most luscious places on earth. And then communism comes in.
Right.
And basically, and again, this is kill, steal, and destroy. And it's a physical representation of it. And that is that when man gets in power, and they are being ruled in essence by the principalities and powers, things are killed, steal, and destroyed, and that's what happened in Cuba.
Right.
Is the lush, plush, fantastic places are in ruin,
right?
Because they didn't take care of it. See, and they thought that was okay because actually they wanted the people to be oppressed and just the heads to have the good stuff. And that's how that's how it's been, for a very long time. Well, we're experiencing right now a rebellion. The Cubans are saying, "Wait a second, we're tired of this," and they're trying to rebel, protest, and some of them have been violent in Cuba because they're saying the national leadership has used their power against us. Right. And so that's the way of the world, is that self-centered people get in power and they do foolish things that are against the beauty of life. And that's what Herod did, well, I'm going to take care of this. And so his wickedness, took over and he kills all these babies. And of course, Mary and Joseph were encouraged, hey, by the way, in a dream, you got to leave. Protect the baby and protect Jesus, and they did. So, as we look at the aspect of the prophetic, well, it lays out that 1 week, remember, is left.
Right.
7 years is left, called the tribulation. It's going to happen. Every day we get closer to it. That's for sure. Every era we get closer to it. And we're going to keep discussing because of what some things that have happened, like Israel returning as a nation, that these are significant events that would heighten the need and the desire to say, I maybe I need to pay attention here. To are we getting closer? And it would be similar to. If you remember when Noah built the ark.
Yes.
And we can't appreciate this because we live in a culture, in a weather pattern where there's rain. Well, the world prior to the rain coming with Noah, the moisture actually came up from the ground. And it came up from the atmosphere, and there wasn't anything as such as rain.
Really?
No.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, there wasn't anything such as rain. So when God said, build a boat, why? Well, because the earth's going to flood. And by the way, he said, I'm flooding it because man has gotten so wicked that I've got to clean it up, so to speak, and we're going to start with you guys again. And so Noah says, okay, I'll build a boat. And he builds this massive ark, and again, it gives some very specific instructions. It takes him 100 years. Okay, well, during that 100 years, he's building the boat. And the people around him are saying, what are you doing?
Right.
I'm building a boat.
You looked like a crazy man.
Yeah, you're in the middle of there's no, what do you mean there's a boat? There's no water for you to go to, and you're building it where you can't get it there. So what are you talking about? Well, it's going to flood. Wow, it's going to rain. What?
What's rain?
No way. It's not going to happen. Well, Noah heard that it's going to happen. In one day, it started raining, and it's flooded the earth. And now his boat, is what saved things. So, it's kind of like where most people are today. Well, yeah, I don't think the end of the earth is going to come. I don't think Jesus is coming back. Who knows? And God says, well, it's happening. It's going to happen.
Right.
And that's why he's telling us to be prepared, be understanding, get some clarity about things. And partly what I believe about it is we can see a little bit perhaps closer as to how the end could be near. And when I say near, I'm saying 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It could be near. And the one thing that really got me was this aspect of COVID. And within a month, the entire world surrendered to that authority. It was a health authority.
Right.
It wasn't even government submitted to it, but it was really the health authority that said, this is what you have to do.
Right.
And we all willingly surrendered to it. Lock down, wear a mask, now get vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. And it was, this isn't the end, but we now could see a scenario where one world government could be put in place.
Right.
We never could see that before because it never had happened. It was like, well, we know it's going to happen because that's what Scripture says.
Right.
But
this is the first time we've seen, the type of event that could bring that about.
Right.
Whether it's that or not, but we saw everybody, and it desensitized people to the idea of, okay, there can be situations where we really simply need to function as one. Right.
And then there's, now you have to, as it moves on, is, and again, this is in relationship to what we could see could be the mark of the beast in terms of the type of the mark of the beast, is that, well, in order to be able to function, you must take a vaccine. Now they haven't gone to the level at the moment of saying if you do, then you can participate in the economic system, and if you don't, we're not going to. It's not that you can't live, but you just won't be able to enjoy this, like travel and restaurants and that kind of stuff. It's not there yet. Interesting enough, the government just came out and said, and these are things that I kind of laugh about because they said, we're going to go door to door in the entire United States and make sure you have the vaccine. And it's like,
right.
That ain't going to happen. Just going door to door would take them forever. And by the way, most people aren't going to be home anyway, so,
Right.
I don't see that happening. That actually is going to happen. But they said this is what we want to do.
Right.
And what I see it as, well, it's the government saying we're going to enforce a policy that we are going to try to put in place. Now, they haven't taken it yet to an extreme, but I can almost predict this, that in the next several years, and it could be sooner than not, there's likely to be a requirement to be vaccinated in order to participate in certain things.
Right.
And in order to
And
demonstrate,
that could be a worldwide.
that would be a worldwide thing.
Yeah.
And to demonstrate that, you have to have it on your phone, your cell phone, that you have a certificate that will be verified that you have it, and that when you go to someplace, you'll have to show it. I have this. And if you can't provide that, you will not be let in. You will not be allowed to go on an airplane. You will not allowed to go to that restaurant. I don't think they'll take it yet to, you can't do anything, like you can't buy things, but at the store, you can't have things delivered. You're just going to have to be kind of quarantined, in your life. Well, okay. That's very possible. Well, we could look at that as, well, that's what the mark of the beast is going to look like. Now, it may not be that. I don't think it's that per se.
Right.
It's just a type of that. So here we've seen one world government. We can see the electronic stuff getting put in place to be able to prove something out.
You see forward momentum for each thing that is spoken about. Yes.
And by the way, Israel has returned as a nation, which is a big deal.
Right.
So these are why we're so wanting to. And here's what we want to do. We don't want to say, well, therefore, the end is next week. The end is next year. The tribulation is going to be. It's very clear in Scripture. Jesus says, you can't predict it. Sorry.
Right.
He says, I don't even know it. Only the Father knows it. And he's not telling anybody. So you can't, if you say that, you're not following me. But, and we're going to get into this a little bit today, watch the signs.
Right.
And then you start to see the season, like you say, hey, the leaves are turning color. It's fall. The time has come. Why? Well, I saw the sign. And that's what he's trying to say to us is, and so what we want to do, what Kathy and I want to do is give you the biblical truth of what is written, what it says, what is going to happen, any implication for us today, and we're going to try to help clarify. Don't go beyond that. Right. Don't add to it. Matter of fact, he says in the Bible at the very end. I was going to say in
Revelations, it says a warning against adding.
Cursed are you if you add to this and put your own spin on it. So we're gonna help interpret it. We can say here's our thinking about it, but let's just look at what Scripture has to say, and then this realize, like the rapture, for example. People say, well, it's pre-trib rapture. Sorry, the Scriptures aren't that clear. You can't absolutely say that, and I think there's a reason for that. And so as I look at that with people and discuss it with people, I say, okay, I understand your perspective, but the Scriptures do not tell you that it is for sure pre-trib rapture. Right. So don't be so sure. Why? Right. Well, because that's what the Scriptures say and don't say. So as we talked about Daniel, we were in Daniel 7, 1-7. He talked about the four beasts. And he said there's three, and these are historical, and they actually represent things throughout history. And then there's the fourth beast, which is different. And it's the fourth beast that comes up during the last week, and he's the beast is, and I'll get into what the beast is, and then the Antichrist comes from the beast during that last thing. And he said it's all different. So we talked about the three beasts that, Daniel was in Babylonia under Nebuchadnezzar. Then the first beast was the Medes and Persians, and they let the Jews return establish a economic system, although they were still not independent.
Right.
Then came the Greeks, and the Greeks conquered the known world, had the beginning of a democracy. Plato, Aristotle, Socrates were all part of that, and they actually had some pretty effective things about teaching, about, don't just be sermonizing, but rather talk about it, dialogue about it.
Method, yeah.
Then the abomination of desolation from Antiochus Epiphanes in 167 BC, where he said, I am God. And Daniel said that is going to happen. And by the way, it happened. And then Christ, we're going to get into later, says, hey, by the way, when that happens again, you'll know something about that.
Right. And if you missed our last session on End Times Fridays, the last one, Rich went into great detail on the history of all three of those that are the symbolism for the first three beasts.
Yep.
So go back if you missed that one, if you want to hear the history on that a little more in depth.
Yep. And then we went into the Roman Empire and actually the time of Christ and how they conquered the world. And they were into the 300s AD, where Constantine, who was the Roman emperor, basically said Christianity is the right religion and everybody has to convert.
Right.
And it was almost by force. And then if you did, you got privileges. If you didn't, you basically lost your privileges. So it was an interesting thing, which, by the way, in the end, it's the reverse. If you reject God, you get privileges. If you stay true to the God in the remnant, you're going to not get privileges.
You're going to lose privileges, right.
So that was in 325 AD, and that's when kind of the Roman Catholic Church began to develop out of Rome with this is the Church Universal. Well, in 620 AD, and now we're still into discussing history here, Muhammad comes. And Muhammad was orphaned at an early age, and he said when he was 40 that he was visited by Gabriel and he received a revelation that Ishmael, remember Isaac and Ishmael?
Ishmael,
the story of Ishmael is that Abraham was given the promised child.
Ishmael's Hagar's child.
He's
right?
Hagar's child, and Sarah, and this goes back to our discussion about God's will. Abraham was given a promise, and he said, "Okay, great, fantastic. I received that, believe it." It wasn't happening. So he says, and Sarah says, "Hey, we're getting pretty old. We may not be able to have babies." And Sarah already was basically in past menopause. So she said, "I'm not capable anymore. So guess what? Why don't you have my handmaiden Hagar, and you basically have a baby with her, and that'll be it." And they said, "Okay, we'll go do it." Now again, we got to receive the simplicity of this. God gave him a promise. They weren't happy with the timing.
Right.
So isn't it a good idea for me to do this to fulfill that promise?
Right. And they didn't see the logic in how he could do that.
Right. And it seems a good idea to me. Now, there's two things that are important. One, they didn't go ask God. They decided, the same thing Adam and Eve did.
Right.
I think I will. And they were in the flesh, in the self. And then secondly, and this is really critical, God didn't prevent them.
Right.
And that's what people say. Well, if it's God's will, he would have prevented Sarah and Abraham from having that baby.
Right.
Because that wasn't
closed that door, or opened that door.
He would have closed it, made sure that didn't happen, made sure Hagar didn't have a baby, woulda. And see, God said, well, if that's your choice and you're not willing to follow me and trust me, and you've decided on your own what to do, your free will is available and you'll suffer the consequences of it. So They have Ishmael. God tells them afterwards, that's not the promised kid. That's not the chosen child. You still have one to come. Well, yeah, and Abraham says, yeah, but Sarah's can't have a baby, and I'm too old now to even have sperm. I can't do it either. He says, doesn't prevent me from fulfilling my promise. So you're going to have another baby, Isaac. She does. And guess what? God says, do you see now? Do you understand it? Yep. Okay, get rid of Ishmael. You got to cast him out. And Paul goes into a great discussion of this in Galatians chapter 4, that Isaac is a promise of the covenant, and Ishmael is the child of the bondwoman, the flesh, and we have to cast that off. It's an interesting discussion about if you're going to live with God, you're going to have to live in the spirit, and you got to cast off the flesh, Isaac and Ishmael. Okay, so Muhammad comes along, and he says Gabriel told him that the Bible and all of that isn't true, and that point that Ishmael is the child of the promise and not Isaac. So it's not the Jews who are the children of God. It's I'm going to create it, and you are to come back and create the Arabs, who was a descendants. Now the Arabs are descendants of Ishmael.
Of Ishmael, yes.
And he knows that, and he said, build an army of Arabs because God is going to bless you through Ishmael. And he's the child of the promise. So he does, and he conquers Mecca. And so by the time he dies, which is about 25 years later, almost all of the Middle East is converted to Islam, believing that, well, we're the child of the promise. And he developed, and this is in the Quran, a theology of killing infidels. And an infidel is anybody that doesn't accept and receive that the Arabs are the true religion. And it wasn't just that you could coexist, because like in our democracy, in America, we have multiple religions, including Islam, interesting enough.
Right.
And we as Christians, our perspective is, well, here's what I believe, but if that's what you believe, that's okay. We can coexist. I'm going to try to what we call evangelize. I'm going to share with you the truth and hope you do it, because I do know something. If you don't receive Christ, you're going to spend eternity in hell separated from God. Right. I'm going to encourage you to reconsider what you believe and what you think, but we can coexist, and I'm certainly not going to come against you and harm you. Well, that's not true of the true Islam. They developed a theology of I'm going to kill you, because that's what I'm called to do, and eliminate anybody that isn't a true believer in the Allah and Ishmael. Okay, well, guess what? The one people that they could identify clearly, by the way, in the Middle East, are Jews. So the enmity started with Muhammad way back in 620 AD. And that was one of the things that we are going to do, is we're going to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. Because they're infidels. And they're so strong. And by the way, Christians are part of that, and we'll see that, the implication of that. And so what they said, and by the way, they still do this, is we're going to co-opt the holy sites that you represent in your religion. We're going to take them over. And we're going to occupy them, so that they took over the place of the Temple Mount, and in 691.
And they have made them sacred places for Islam
for Islam.
as well, right? Okay.
So they, in 691, they built the Dome of the Rock on where the temple was. By the way, remember, it was destroyed. They
Right.
built the mosque that they worship in on the very same site as the temple. We've co-opted that. In our lifetime, they have taken over Bethlehem,
Right.
the birthplace of Christ. They're in the process of taking over Nazareth, where Christ lived. They want to take over all of Jerusalem, and be rulers of all of Jerusalem, because that's what they believe is their right to have the occupation of the nation of Israel. And just like in the United States, we had 9/11, the destruction
Right.
of the Twin Towers. Well, they successfully have built a mosque next to that site. Because, see, their viewpoint is, I'm going to occupy, co-opt any site and demonstrate that we are superior, because that's what they believe. In 1096, began from 1096 to 1192 were the Six Crusades, and that was, now we're coming against Jews and Christians, and the Crusades are back and forth. So it's the Islam is coming against all the Christians, and then particularly out of the Catholic Church. Well, we're going to go against we're going to have a crusade against the Muslims, and so it's back and forth. The Jews and Muslims were slaughtered each other, and whoever won that crusade. So the Muslims would prevail, and they would kill the Jews and the Christians. Sometimes the Christians prevailed, and they killed the Muslims. And it was warfare and battle, and you could see on both sides of it was demonic, was principalities and powers, because it's kill, steal, and destroy.
Right.
And at the end of that, 1192, the Christians were defeated and retreated, and the Muslims ruled the Middle East.
Okay.
So they six crusades. They both back and forth, but ultimately the Muslims prevailed. So now 400 years later, 1492 is called the Spanish Inquisition, and you you know what happened in 1492, right?
Well, all of Columbus too.
Yeah,
right?
Columbus discovered America. The Spanish Inquisition is, they ordered all the Jews and Muslims to convert to Catholics, Christianity, or leave. And so they came against them. And so Columbus, and this is really interesting, everybody thinks he was sent by Queen Isabella from Spain. He wasn't.
Really?
He was sent by 3 prominent Jewish leaders. And they funded him and said, go find us a new place.
Interesting.
And he wasn't sent by Queen Isabella. He was funded by Jewish leaders, which interesting enough, in the very same year were these blood moons that happened in 1947, when Israel became a nation again, and it happened in 1967 when Israel nation became Israel again, and it just happened again.
Didn't we recently?
Yeah, in 2014-15, the blood moons happened again.
Right.
Now again, part of it, and I would say I was a little bit thinking this way too. We don't understand the essence of the times, so that we think, well, if the blood moon, then it's going to happen exactly then. And well, his timing, is different, but the blood moons happened, which I believe is significant. So they forced the Jews out. They were funded, and a lot of the Jews moved to America after it was founded by Columbus. And so they built a big population here. And the Muslims retreated, by the way, back into Middle East. So they were infiltrating Europe at the time, but because of this Spanish Inquisition, they went back to the Middle East. They were safe there, and they kept, building their power base there, and they didn't infiltrate Europe much. In 1849, the British Anglican Church, which remember now is Protestant, and they founded Christ Church in an embassy that was in Jerusalem. And so they said, we're going to bring Christianity back to the area, and we're going to start in our embassy, which is safe. And we're going to establish Christ Church in the embassy. Interesting enough, and there's a great story of this, which you can, if you go to Jerusalem, you can really get into the depth of this. But a group of intercessors in 1850 were led by God, start praying for the return of the Jewish nation. And they were called to do it, and they established this Christ Church in the embassy. And they would, both in London and England and in Jerusalem, these groups of intercessors were just praying, okay, God, what do you got to say? What do you got to say? What are you up to? What are you doing? We know that
I love that.
We know that you're going to return the Jews back to Israel as a nation, and so we're going to set it up. And so what happened from 1849 through the World War I is, and the Jews were kind of skeptical of you being here, Christians. Hey, you Christians, what are you doing here? But what they did, they were led by God to say, well, why don't you start hospitals and serve the sick? Why don't you get some schools going and teach people how to be literate? And I'm asking you, and this is cool by God, I'm not asking you to convert them. You just serve them. And they started to appreciate the heart of these British people that were just, hey, we're going to take care of your sick. We're going to educate you. We're here for you. I'm sure some people came to know Christ during that time, but that wasn't their primary call. It was to pray for the return of the Jews. In 1918, we know what happened. Germany was defeated. By the way, the Muslims had joined what's called the Axis. And that's Germany, Hungary, Bulgaria, Austria were the Axis, the people that are trying to rule the world. And the Muslims joined them. Well, they got defeated.
Right.
So they had to retreat back to the Middle East again. And then in 1919, it was called the British Mandate. And the League of Nations set up Israel under British rule. They weren't a nation yet, but Israel, instead of it being Muslim, instead of it being Jewish, it's British. And
I have no idea.
And then,
or if I did, I forgot.
And then everybody can basically function now under British rule, called the British Mandate. Well, because since 1850, the Britons were praying for the return of the Jews, and they were, and the people who were in leadership in Jerusalem under the British Mandate, a lot of them were Christians. And so what they did is that they invited people from all over the world, Jewish people, come back to Israel, and and we'll keep you safe. Now, we're not giving authority to you, but you come back and you live here, and you can go back to enjoying Jerusalem, enjoying Galilee, all the sites again, have life again. And since you're from Israel, and the remarkable thing is that the Jews were pure for 2,000 years, which is remarkable. Because remember, they didn't have a homeland.
Right.
So one of the miracles for me is that they're still pure Jews. Because you would have thought over 2,000 years, well, they'd just be gone.
Right.
and assimilated into every place. Well, they kept pure. So he said, come back. And then in 1938, Hitler shows up with the Holocaust and does World War II. And the axis now is Germany, Italy, Japan, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. And guess what? They're defeated again. However, the Muslims, knowing what happened in World War I, they didn't join anybody. They just said, we're just staying out of it. And they were very weak politically and economically. Well, in 1947, the United Nations, now that the World War II is over and Germany's been defeated, establishes, because of the British mandate, and Britain was willing to hand it over to the nation of Israel. And they became independent in 1947. And Britain supported it. The United Nations supported it, and the world supported it. Now, there was limitation in the land. It only was partial, the biblical land, but they had the nation of Israel. Then in 1967 is called the 6-Day War, and that is all the Muslim nations, Islam nations around it, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Iran, Iraq. They come together and say, you know what? Let's just wipe them off the face of the earth again. You know, we're way bigger than them. Let's just do it. Well, they did. They attacked, and Israel in 6 days defeated them.
Wow.
Way, way, way overmatched, and they defeated them miraculously, and God preserved them. They get defeated, and it's not even a prolonged war. It's 6 days, and they give up, and they said, "Okay, we're going back home. Go ahead, you can have it." And they got all the biblical land back.
Okay.
So it was partial in 1947, and then in 1967, all the biblical land was given back to them. Now, they did allow Muslims to coexist with them. So the Dome of the Rock, where the Temple Mount is, and the Muslim mosque,
so those things still coexist.
They stayed there, and they said, "Yeah, well, we're not gonna force you to." They could have said, "Well, you got to leave." They said, "Okay, it's okay, you can stay and do that." And then in 1994, the Palestinian Authority, is called the PLA, was established for the purpose, again, of co-occupation of Jerusalem and Israel, with a real goal underneath it all of they want to eliminate Israel, the Jews.
Right.
And that's why Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. And what happened is that Islam split into they were these longtime sects. They've been that way, for 500 years. The Shiites and the Sunnis.
Right.
And so the Shiites are the more extreme version of it, and they're more close to the Quran. We're gonna kill the infidel,
Which
and they want and they want to eliminate Israel and Jews. The Sunnis are more moderate, and they're more, we're more Muslim, but we can exist with you at the same time, which is why Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, they're all partners with America.
Okay.
Because
so they're all part of the Sunni.
Yeah, they're the Sunni nations, and I like that, But so now we're in a place of the whole history has been portrayed by Daniel, and we understand now Israel, where it was in all that history under those beasts. Hey, guess what? It's back as a nation, and that's why it's so significant that and Jesus said, "With that nation, that people, the generation that sees that happen, will see me return." That's why we can say,
Which we are in the generation that, according to your conversation with Netanyahu, that is a definitive time. That
because according to them, in 2012, he stood up and said, "Hey, we're officially a nation because we now have half the Jews living in Israel." So those are the three beasts. And then remember, and next week, we'll get into talking about the signs and what this looks like. But there's still a fourth beast.
Right.
And Daniel said, hey, it's different. Why? Well, because it's during the last 7 years. So that one of the significant pieces that we are to observe, be part of, and watch is Israel.
Right.
All of these beasts throughout history, all were in relationship to Israel and what happened with Israel. And
so this is part of why Israel is such a central part
it's
of
so
all of this
critical.
prophecy.
So that, and again, in America, and I'd like to help encourage people on this, we tend to be what I call U.S. centric.
Right.
And we even think Israel doesn't matter because that's Old Testament stuff. Well, it matters. It's significant. It's very important for us to understand it. And in our understanding of the spiritual world, Israel is central to it. And what's going to happen in the end, part of what happens in all the description of Revelation, it all centers around Israel. So we got to pay attention to that. And don't be thinking so much U.S. centric and that we're the powerhouse. And all that it matters is what we do or don't do. And by the way, one of the things that I can say to people today is, do you recognize that America is waning in its power? Do you realize that America is waning in its influence? And that maybe, we're not who we thought we were in terms of the history of the world. And we're just now, we were having this fantastic life as a democracy, but we're starting to see the lessening of that. Well, why? Well, because everything shifts to the Middle East, and everything shifts to Israel. So that's what we got to start paying attention to and understand. Now it impacts us because we live in America. So we want to know about that stuff. Well, I've gone way over time on this, but I wanted to get through it and help us understand the historical aspect, which if you go back last week and on Friday and then this week, put those two together, it really sets the stage.
It really does. It's fascinating too.
For everything, so that we can get into the meat of it in terms of, okay, what is now going to happen in that last week? And that's what we're going to start turning our attention to is what now is up. And maybe because of what we've just seen with Israel, we could ask, I guess, legitimately, because we now know something, is this it? Is this the time?
Right.
And time, remember, is years and years and years. So, is it tomorrow? I don't think so. But it could be within the next several decades, and we're happen to live during that time. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for clarifying all of that. I know there's a lot of people out there. I even got a comment from a listener the other day about just how grateful she is that you're going through this, because she is one of those that you and I talk about where Revelations is so intimidating that you just don't really look at it.
Yep.
And so to get the history behind it, and as well as just great wisdom on what they were talking about and the symbolism, that's so useful to set the stage.
Yes.
So thank you.
Okay, so we'll see you next week. Have a great weekend, and we'll pick up Discerning God's Will again.
Sounds great. Have a great weekend. And I will see you in Colorado.
Yep.
soon.
Yeah, we look forward to that. That's going to be fun. Okay, everybody, have a great weekend.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.